down, but we'll start up here.
How are you doing?
Is that you? A couple announcements first. Okay. Remember, we're being recorded, so I've been asked to make a few announcements. This is the Wyoming Water Development Commission, not the WYDOT meeting, which is next door. If anybody's here for the WYDOT meeting, if you could mute your cell phones. The acoustics are not great in here, so if you can speak slowly, that will help. Katie will hold up a pink card if you're not picking up on the recording. And because of the acoustics, if you could take sidebar conversations to the lobby, and also be sure and sign in, which I think I forgot, but I'll try to remember. And the first order of business is the roll call, and that's for Clinton, but I don't think he's here.
It's for me.
Oh, is that for Kellen? I'm sorry. Kellen?
I didn't get a paper. Oh, I did get it.
It's about 3 pages in, I think.
Got it. We'll do roll call now. Nick Bettis. Karen Bud Fallon. Here. David Evans.
Here.
Gerald Geis. Here. Clinton W. Glick. Kellen Lancaster here. Sheridan Little. Here. Jeanette Seekin. Here. Larry Suker.
Here.
Rod Wagner. Here. In fact, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay. Go ahead.
Do a quick roll call for Select Water. Somebody to do that? Or not? Okay. Go just a sec.
2 pages behind the other one.
Yeah, we're always behind. Wait, okay, I'll go ahead and do roll call since Josh isn't here, but Representative Paxton, Representative Northrop is excused, Representative Lawson, Representative Eklund, Representative Blake is excused, and Chairman Hunt, let me start with Senator, my apology, should have done that to begin with. Senator Bebout is an alternate. Okay, Senator Moniz.
Here.
Senator Meyer is excused. Senator Hicks.
Present.
Senator Dockstetter. Excused. Senator Anselmi Dalton.
Here.
Vice Chair Driscoll is excused. And Chairman Hunt is here. So we have a quorum. Thank you.
Now we'll go to the audience introductions. Why don't we start at the far end of the table and go around, or start with Harry and then that direction, and then we'll go to the audience.
Okay. Harry Labonte, Director of the Water Development Office.
Jody Green, Water Development. Katie Talbot, Water Development.
Jerry Paxton, House District 47.
Dan Larson from Powell.
Karen Bud Fallon, Water Development Commission, Public at Large.
Jeanette Seekin, Wyoming Water Development Commission, Division 3.
Hans Hunt, Representative for House District 2, Chairman of Select Water Committee.
David Evans, Wyoming Water Development Commission, the Southeast Wyoming District.
Gerald Geis, Wyoming Water Development Commission, District 3.
Rod Wagner, Wyoming Water Development, District 1.
Sheridan Little, Wyoming Water Development Commission, Water Division 2.
Larry Suker, Water Development Commissioner, District 2.
Kellen Lancaster, Water Development, District 4.
Glick, Wyoming Water Development Commission, Wind River.
Lisa Anselmi Dalton, Senate District 12, Rock Springs, Wyoming. Select Water.
Glenn Moniz, Senate District 10, Albany County.
Larry Hicks, Senate District 11.
Steve Wolf, State Engineer.
Chris Nicholson, Water Resources Data System.
Give the prize to Greg Kerr in the audience for speaking the most clearly. So model yourself after him, and that'll be good.
You couldn't hear me?
I could hear you. We have some survey results from the Public Water System Survey by WRDS. Harry?
So, Mr. Chairman, every year, WORDS conducts a survey on our behalf. Year one, it would be irrigation systems across the state. Year two, municipal or potable water systems. And so, Chris, you ready to go? Okay.
You have your setup?
You're all set.
Okay.
So I'm just going to give Chairman Evans and Commission members, thank you for your time. Just going to give a brief presentation on our public water system survey. So this is, as Director Labonte said, we have about 192 entities from around the state that we send surveys out to. And so this is just a general map of what we've been doing. We have these surveys going back to 1998. It's a very short survey. It's about 2 pages, and it directly addresses some of your criteria and your applications and everything else. And so we try to keep it relatively brief and comprehensive. This survey is also used by some other entities like the USGS, who's interested in some information about public entity water systems. So it's a fairly comprehensive survey, and I would recommend if anybody has an opportunity to go online and check it out and take a look at some of the questions that we ask on your behalf. We keep all of this information online, so everyone here has access to it. I'm going to give you guys a real brief demo, but this is something that you guys can access from your home page. What we do is we compile the results of these surveys. This gives you this chart over here on the left. It's really hard to read. Just gives you an idea of who responds, how many people respond, how they respond. So for example, about 15% responded by email, 14% responded by regular mail, and we do have an online survey, and 23% of the folks answered it that way. So more and more people are becoming comfortable with online surveys. This is a tool that allows us to get the information very quickly. You can also see in the upper right-hand corner how frequently different entities answer the survey. We send it out every 2 years, but not everybody sends one back every 2 years. And we understand that. So, but if you look back to 2016, out of our 192 surveys that we have about 150, we have information from about 154 that's only 2 years old. So in the world of surveys and getting information back, this is really a high percentage. And so we really want to thank the public water systems and who answers it. This is a fantastic set of results, and it's a pretty comprehensive data set. We compile all the answers into a report that gives some really basic summary statistics that I'll show you. For example, in total, we can account for 480,000 people who are getting public water system water from these different entities. Average residential tap fees from around the state, $1,922. Your average monthly water bill is $40. Rate for each 1,000 gallons above the base amount, $2. So all of this information we compile. One of the problems that we do have is that the information isn't always consistent. And so we do sometimes get agencies that send us information that really doesn't make sense. So some of these summary statistics, we have to sort of throw out the wonky data. But this really gives us a good idea about all sorts of information. Another one up here in the right-hand corner, the entity bills by meter. We have 137 out of those 192 that bill by some sort of meter. We still have 45 in the state that do not. And then this chart on the right-hand side shows the average residential base water rate versus average monthly water bill. And I'm just going to go ahead and give the live demo. So I just want to show you guys on the websites where you can access this information. So this is the regular Wyoming Water Development Commission website. On the left-hand side, whoops.
This one.
There we go. Sorry about that, just a loose cord. So this is the regular Wyoming Water Development Commission site. On the far left-hand side, we have a series of items that you can access different information. We have the irrigation and water system surveys here. If you open that tab, it'll take you to sort of our partition between the irrigation system surveys and the public water system surveys. Over here on the right side, you can access that information. So we have it set up that you can view the survey itself by downloading a PDF. And then you can actually go back and you can select different years. You can go back to 1998, I believe, to see what some of the survey results were. And then we show the different maps of where these different entities were or are. We are working on actually a new tool to give you guys a little bit better understanding of sort of, since we have this information that goes back to 1998, we wanted to come up with sort of an interactive graph where you can grab this information over time and see how things have changed. So this is a tool that we've come up with that you can click on anywhere in the state, and we have a map down here that shows you different entities. You can type in a location. And I'll pick Laramie. And so here you can compare Cheyenne to Laramie for population served over time. Go to something slightly more interesting. Here's the billing rates. So looking at Cheyenne versus Laramie, again, you can come up here and you can hover over the value and see how much each charges over time. We also have fiscal information, and all of this information is provided by the entity. So this is all public information. You can see the annual budgets over time. Emergency and replacement fund. Water bill revenues. Really kind of a handy set of information just so you can see things over time. The other place that we keep this information where you can access the most current information for each entity is over here on our Water and Climate Web Atlas. So again, this is a tool that you guys have access to. It's an interactive mapping website that shows where all of those entities are around the state. So you can come down here to Laramie and hopefully click on it. And here's all the most recent information that Laramie provided. Everything from down the population served, the number of wells, to what are the revenues from water bills. This is all the information that they provided. Really, that's it. If you guys have any questions, or if there's anything that would be helpful for you guys that we can put online, we'd be more than happy to. And if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
You have, like an attribute that tells how much people went over their limit?
No, that's not a question that we've asked. But that's, I mean, again, that's something, if there's any questions that you guys are interested in, that's something that could potentially be asked on the survey.
Flagging you.
Sorry. My question was, is there an attribute on his database here that shows or tells how many people went over their limit for their water? Like, you know how you gallons used, yeah. If you got 10,000 a year and then you get charged more if you went over.
No, we don't ask that directly, but the two questions that we do ask is how much is your water bill for 10,000 gallons? How much is your water bill for 20,000 gallons? So that we can see if there's any tiered rates, but we don't ask how many people actually go over.
The reason I was asking was because a lot of people are getting gardens, and I know there's a lot of people starting to use more than water than what they used to. That's just a question.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you.
I'd run the computer first.
Next item is the Gillette-Campbell County Water System Survey results. And I guess that looks like it's Brian.
Afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Under tab H, you'll see on the first page is a memo to Harry from me, and this is a memo that summarizes the Gillette Regional Water Supply Survey results. On June 6th, we sent out 15 surveys, and these surveys went out to districts who have not signed the water service agreement with the city of Gillette. So currently there's approximately 23 districts that have signed on with the city of Gillette to provide water to them from the regional system. So again, these were the 15 that have not signed their water service agreements. So as you can see, out of the 15 that we sent out, we got results. We got 3 surveys were returned to us. Probably the important questions start with number 2. Has your entity signed a water service agreement with the city of Gillette to receive water from the regional system? All 3 entities indicated no. Question number 4, does your entity plan on signing a water service agreement for level A or level B service? That was not applicable because they were not intending to sign their water service agreement. And then question 9 has to deals with future level 1, level 2 studies. And the question was, in the next 5 years, does your entity intend to apply to the WWDC for level 1 reconnaissance or level 2 feasibility study to evaluate the entity's water supply system? And again, the answer to those for those 3 entities were no. The entities that responded were Campbell County Airport. They had 18 taps. Lakeview Mobile Home has 19 taps, so these are relatively small districts. Cedar Hills Water Association, they had 100 taps, so that's a fairly large district. After these were due back in our office by July 15th, and when we only received the few survey results, we reached out and contacted all of the districts that hadn't submitted their surveys and encouraged them to submit the surveys, and they elected not to fill these surveys out and return them to us.
There was 3.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the first was...
Okay, sorry, Lakeview. Okay, gotcha.
So then on page 2, you'll see it's a summary of the district survey contact information. So this is what was used to reach out to the districts and where we sent the surveys to. Any questions?
Oh, and only 3 entities replied?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. Real quick, with that they replied at all, or did anybody else send back incomplete surveys?
No, these were only the 3 that were provided surveys back at all.
How many taps were there?
Mr. Chairman, on the Lakeview Mobile Home Park, there's 19 taps.
There any large number of taps at either one of these?
Mr. Chairman, I think probably let me look through my list here real quick. The largest district is Sleepy Hollow. That's almost due south of Gillette. First light that you come into off of Highway 59. It's just to the east. That particular district has 420 taps.
Senator Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry. I'm just wondering, what were we trying to find out here? And what was the purpose of these surveys? And if they don't respond, what's the impact, obviously? Because
well, the purpose of the survey was to see what interest there is in the districts to connect to the regional system. Was the first purpose. The second purpose was to see if and when the entities might apply for a level 1 or level 2 study, trying to give the commission and staff a heads up of when those applications might be coming in. To answer your second question, there's no repercussions for them not filling out the survey.
Back when this was built, or was there was it build it and everybody will come, or was there a plan thinking most of these, was there, obviously there was a need, or maybe some people were in the legislature at the time when this was decided.
Sure.
Can we have a little history lesson back on when this occurred? And Harry, I know you weren't part of the water development either, so.
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, what ultimately led to the Gillette-Madison project expansion, Gillette had looked at other options. They have other wells, Union formation wells, and they looked at going south and developing a well field there. Ultimately, what was decided is that if we're going to invest in expanding Gillette's system, we wanted to be able to take in all of these other public water systems in and around Gillette, which have their own wells currently. But because we periodically get requests from the other districts, truly build a regional system then where these districts in the future at some point, no schedule or anything, if they need additional water resources or if their well were to fail, then there's a regional solution that we would, in essence, direct them towards. So that was kind of the purpose of the original planning study. And then the service area was discussed in a planning document that, and certainly all of these districts were included in the planning document in terms of overall sizing the system. But again, there's if a district is operating and has a good well and has a distribution system and has a DEQ certified operator that runs it for them, there may not be a reason for them to connect to the system. But ultimately, the regional system is the final solution if they need assistance in the future.
All of these, was there a survey done back then of interest before these millions of dollars was spent, so that there was a future possibility that all of these entities would ultimately join at some point in the future? So was there an interest with all of these entities when this was started?
Commissioner Guy says so.
Started, it was hodgepodge, and everybody was coming down getting their own little systems. And finally, we just shut them down and said, no, we're not going to fund every little, we're going to start making them form bigger groups in order for us to have the money to supply them all. And one thing led to another, and then we come with the first 6 artesian wells for Gillette, and now we're getting another 5 or 6 more. It's just been once they knew they had good water coming out of the artesians, everybody wanted to hook up, because most of these subdivision, that water was coming out of these coal seams, and it was a long ways from being good water.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, in any planning document, you're making assumptions. You're drawing boundaries to say, well, we could serve this area. But if a community or public water system in, I'll say 2009, or even going back into the 1980s when the original Madison system was constructed, they may have felt that their system was adequate at that time and no problems. They would have had potentially no interest in connecting to a regional system at that time. But situations change. If the well fails and you're looking at investing significant sums in upgrading or drilling a new well, coming as Commissioner Geis has indicated, if they came to us for assistance on a well, and I have had those kinds of calls, why don't you invest in a new well for our district? My answer is, we have a regional system that's near completion, and that is the solution, the water supply solution for this area.
Anticipated follow-up
Oh, okay.
question.
But situations change. These public water systems often are operated by an elected board, or if it's a private system, it could be a group of homeowners. Those people turn over, so in the course of decades, the position changes. But ultimately, it is state assistance that we are driving to say the most economical solution is a regional system for this area.
So you've got these three systems that aren't, or these three groups that aren't going to do a water survey, or that haven't had a tap fee and paid to tap into the Gillette system, out of how many people that have?
Mr. Chairman, I can't tell about the number of taps, but again, the number of districts that have signed their water service agreements, 23. And so these are the 15 again that haven't signed their water service agreements with the city of Gillette. And I would add too to Harry's comment that one of the issues that's going on with the Fort Union formation right now in and around the city of Gillette is water quality is changing. They haven't had problems with radionuclides or fluorides, and these are contaminants that are primary contaminants on the US EPA list, and so they have to be addressed. And so these elevations, we're seeing elevations of these constituents in the water, and to treat it, it's very expensive. And so once these districts start to experience these elevated concentrations of whether it's radionuclides or fluorides, I don't think they're going to have any option but to connect to the system. I think it's the cheapest option and the most logical solution to their problem.
Other questions of Brian?
Mr. Chairman, I do. How many have signed water service agreements? Did you say? I might not have heard that.
Mr. Chairman, 23 districts have signed their water service agreements.
23. Can we get a list of those somehow?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we can provide those to you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The ones that do sign, do they get a benefit of not having to have somebody on staff to keep track, to test the water and that sort of thing? Is that one of the benefits?
Mr. Chairman, to me, the benefit is, again, it's a reliable water source. A lot of these districts only have one well. So if their well goes down, they're without water. But if, obviously with the city of Gillette system, they have 10 wells, existing wells in the Madison formation. We drilled another 5 wells under this program. The total capacity out of that well field is approximately 26,000 gallons a minute. And so, but it also, the water quality issue that it's going to meet the US EPA primary drinking water standards. So the reliability and the water quality are the things that, to me, should be the selling points for these districts to sign on.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could add to that, generally how this scenario works is Gillette is responsible for the Gillette-Madison pipeline project. If there is a pipeline extension from that to a district or several districts, Gillette operates and maintains the extension. But generally, these districts maintain their autonomy as a water provider. So they still have to have a DEQ certified operator to operate their distribution system. Some of them have their own water storage tanks. And so we still have this number of public water systems. And unless Gillette were to annex those areas into their jurisdiction, it's doubtful that at least the distribution piping would become part of Gillette's system, where Gillette would take over the operation and maintenance of the system. So we're still going to have these private systems in the outlying area, but one source of supply.
If, say, Campbell County Airport decided they changed their mind, in 5 years, could Gillette say no?
Well, Mr. Chairman, hypothetical scenario, Gillette could say no. I think the understanding in investing in the both Gillette-Madison systems is that, in fact, Gillette has agreed to be a regional provider. Then logically you would accept them into your system. If they would approach the city and say, we'd like to connect, there's a water service agreement that Gillette uses, then that body would have to accept the water service agreement and Gillette would accept them in. So I'm not going to prejudge what Gillette might do, but Gillette has agreed to be the regional water provider. So I would assume they would say yes.
They've agreed with whom?
Pardon me?
They've agreed with whom to be the water service provider?
That is the premise of this entire large investment by the state of Wyoming, is that we're building not only for Gillette's growth, but for these existing water systems in and around Gillette.
That theoretically they could say no. I guess my question is, why would the state allow that if these entities were included in the planning and part of the build out decades out or whatever? Why and how would Gillette have the ability to say no?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, I won't prejudge decision-making of future city councils. I don't know.
The state gave them the veto power after giving them all the money.
Mr. Chairman, there is not an institutional agreement that puts the state in this relationship between Gillette and providing water to districts. So, but I would tell you, I would be shocked if the city of Gillette said, no, we're not going to provide water. But again, it's a pretty fluid situation. Each district has its own board and they make their own decisions. And I will tell you that I believe that Gillette has been fair in dealing with these other districts. There is a joint powers board in place between the county and the city of Gillette. Brian actually serves on that. And one of its primary purposes was to set the wholesale water rate that Gillette would provide water to these outlying districts. And the rate, $3.01 per 1,000 gallons, I would judge to be a reasonable water rate. That was a concern. Will Gillette bring the prices up where nobody will want to connect? The Joint Powers Board addresses that issue. And so I think Gillette has been reasonable. And again, if they're approached from a district to say we'd like to connect, then Gillette thus far has shown a willingness to serve water. And that, again, that's the underlying premises of this whole project.
On this a little bit, Harry, the pricing. So as these 23 districts have come in for the connections, has this water rate remained flat or has it been retroactively raised to the other people as it's gone up, or what's going on there?
Mr. Chairman, so the $3.01 rate, obviously, that was recommended in a study that was performed by HDR. Obviously, the rate could be impacted down the road as they get more or less districts signing on, just depends on how many districts sign on. But as Harry indicated, I think the Gillette has been reasonable. I think the rate's a good rate. I think 301 is a pretty fair rate. You look at the system that Gillette has to operate, because this is not only the current system that they're constructing, but they have a 30-inch pipeline that comes from 10 wells that's also supplying water to this regional system. So again, to me, it's a fair rate.
Any other questions of Brian? All right. Thanks, Brian, and a thank you to the three entities that did respond, and disappointing more of them didn't. At any rate, the next presentation is some financial information on our accounts. And that's through you, Harry, I presume.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. So 2 items for your consideration. One is the financial projections that we provide every August for each of the 3 funds, Water Development Accounts 1, 2, and 3. And this sets the basis then for your decision-making in November as we start to advance the next round of omnibus water projects to the legislature. The second item that I will deal with is the reservoir O&M accounts, and there is a statutory provision that the commission review those accounts once a year and report back to the Joint Ag Committee as well as to Joint Appropriations. So with regards to financial projections on the 3 funds, if you turn to tab I, you have 3 pages there, each dealing with one of the funds. So and I'll walk you through kind of in detail how Andy Odell and my chief financial officer puts these projections together every year. So looking at account 1, we start with the actual cash balance on June 30th, 2017, so a little more than a year ago. And then we bring in all of the revenue that was received in fiscal year 18. So you see taxes, that is the severance tax distribution that flows to Water One, 19.3 million in round numbers. There is interest that is generated on the cash balance. The treasurer's office operates that, and that's paid directly to the account. And then we have loans and interest, and that's a pretty big number this year, $5.6 million. And we had a number of loans that were paid off, both in account 1 and account 2. So it's not just the loan payments that come in. If the account balance, the loan is paid in full, that flows back to the account. And then other miscellaneous charges that would flow into the account. So that totals $27.8 million in round numbers of revenue in fiscal year 18. Then we get to expenditures. So in fiscal year 18, total expenditures, $44 million, $44.7 million. That leaves you with a cash balance of $112 million. And then we have to bring in the outstanding commitments, and those commitments take the form primarily of projects that have been funded. But so that is total projects that have been funded. You see the asterisk that shows that it also includes the Board of Control diversion out of account 1 that pays now for all of their operations. It's about $6.7 million per year. That's included in those active appropriations. There's also within that an appropriation that flows to Department of Ag for TMDL testing. We being Water Development fund half of the local share for the drinking water SRF loan program that's administered by state lands. But the vast majority of that $180 million represents projects. And so construction projects are normally given 5 years to complete. Planning projects anywhere from 1.5 years to 2.5 years. If it's been approved through an omnibus water bill and it's still active, it will show up in that $180 million in obligations or active appropriations. We subtract from that expenditures that have been paid. So if we have a construction project that, let's say it's the grant that we are awarding is $10 million to an entity, and they have requested previously payment of half of that or $5 million, then that what has been paid out will show up in the expenditures paid, so the $68 million. So the remaining outstanding commitments represent $112 million. You bring that down with the balance on the cash, it gives you an uncommitted balance in that fund of about $25,000. So, you know, from a program perspective, I think we're doing a very good job of getting the dollars out to sponsors. And of course, the commission, you've been balancing projects that you fund based on our revenue stream. So that then brings us to this point. That's in essence, the uncommitted balance on July 1st, 2018, the end of fiscal year, or excuse me, the start of fiscal year 19. We then bring in the revenue as projected for fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20, so the 19-20 biennium. And as you can see, the taxes, we rounded off to $19.3 million. There's an interest that we expect to accrue on unspent balance, and then other anti-lumps, loan payments, and other payments coming into that fund. So roughly $23 million in revenue coming each year. We do the same in fiscal year 20, and that projection is the same. So subtotal of anticipated revenues in the current biennium, $46.2 million. You bring down the unspent balance of, or uncommitted balance, $25,000. And so the balance that is available for appropriation in account one, a little over $46 million. So that is the amount that is available for projects going forward. What I will, in terms of the schedule, the next round of projects will go to the 2019 legislature. Those projects, the omnibus bills are structured or worded so that the appropriation is available upon signature of the governor, upon all acts required by the state law. But those projects generally do not get started until the next fiscal year, after July 1 of that year, so fiscal year 20. So when we look at the funding here, you have one funding cycle of projects, again, that won't start until next summer, but that's in the second year of the biennium. So in terms of spending and availability, you have $46 million available for projects for the 19 legislative session. Now, Andy cautions me that in any cash management scenario, you don't want to spend the full $46,225,000 or obligate it. You'd want to hold some back. But I think it does show that we have a very healthy cash balance or cash projection going forward for projects. And then advancing 2 years from now, the projects that would be brought forward to the 2020 legislative session, those projects won't start until fiscal year 2021. That puts them into the next biennium. So next year's projection will then bring revenue streams that would be available for projects in 2020 and beyond, or the 2021 biennium. So again, I think we're in very good shape going forward for Water One. One of the reasons, I guess I would say, you have a healthy cash balance here, or balance available for appropriation, is that if you look at last year's projects, the projects approved in the 18 legislature, there was only about $10 million in construction projects. typically that number is running 20 to 30 million. So for whatever reason, we did not get a lot of construction applications. That's, to me, an anomaly for that 1 year. I would expect that balance to come up into the future. And then you'll see this balance going down as a result of more construction projects.
I was going to say something. I'm confused by these numbers. Unless I'm missing something, what's available for anticipated revenues is 46 million. If you bring down the 25, isn't that 71, or am I missing something?
Missing 3 digits, Mr. Chairman. It's $25,000 as
25,000.
uncommitted.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Unfortunately.
Commissioner Bud Fallon?
I'm just trying to figure out how that applies to the interviews we're going to do in a month, whenever it is. So that's money that we're going to spend on this next set of interviews, or a year from now?
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Bud Fallon, so the interviews and projects that you're going to be considering in the next 2 months will then be part of the omnibus water bill planning that will then be considered by the 2019 legislature. So yes, those projects, if they make it through the legislative process, will be paid for with this $46 million. If they're account one projects.
Or, okay. Okay, no, I'm good. I'm good.
Quick question, Harry, under the expenditures, has that number been remaining relatively the same aside from what we pay the state engineer under that 44 million? Or is
so the 44 million,
right?
So that's total expenditures in fiscal year 18. That varies a lot on the projects, but I would say that's a pretty typical number in terms of expenditures. It does include the state engineer board of control. That was $6.2 million that was diverted for fiscal year 18. And so that expenditure has been paid in full. That's in that $44 million number.
Prior to that, in the years prior to that, we were spending somewhere around 35 to 38. Is that about right or not?
So
when you kick out the state engineer stuff?
So, Mr. Chairman, that number is not something that remains constant because it's really a function of the construction projects primarily and planning projects that are underway. So when, for example, a number of years ago when Cheyenne was completing a leg of their southern transmission line, we had a $20 million grant with them. Actually, it was closer to $30 million. Those funds were spent in about a 2-year period, but 3 if you look at some dollars on the front end and back end. So that would have skewed that number higher because we had higher expenditures for a bigger project. So it really is more of a function of how many construction projects we have going. Are they moving forward, or if projects have been delayed? So it's a variable number every year.
Question.
I hear you.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't bring the history with me, but I can tell you there are years where it's higher. I don't think, a lot higher, right? $50 million, maybe pushing 60. And then there's years where it's maybe lower than that in the $30 million to $40 million range. It's really is a function of how projects are progressing. And because construction projects make up the biggest dollar volume of that number, it's a function of the construction projects that you'll see it go up or down. But in past years, you are correct, you would not have seen a $6+ million expenditure to the state engineer's office there.
Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so just to kind of tack on to that, so when you go to those anticipated revenues in 19 and 20 and come up with that 26 or that 46.2, the way the budget's currently structured, that's going to be a reoccurring expense to pay for the Board of Control. So you can right off the top take that 46.2 and subtract $13.4 million out of that budget, which will, compared to the 23 million that you have been spending, you're down to 15 to $16 million. That was a significant rate on water development. Harry, correct me if I'm wrong, but that doesn't show up. And the way the budget's currently structured, that money is pretty much headed towards, unless we're able to correct that in the next session. But right now, it's anticipated that $13.4 million is going to come out of account one, which is going to, again, that's 32 instead of $46 million you're going to have to spend. So cautionary note moving forward, it's a lot less than I think this, if we run through assumptions. The assumption is right now, at least from the legislature, is that money's coming out of account one to fund the Board of Control.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, slight correction to Senator's comments. The $13.2 million that was approved by the legislature for this biennium, so the 1920 biennium, that number is in that $180,000 or $180 million active appropriation number. Those funds flowed out or accounted for on July 1st. So at least for the current biennium, this analysis reflects that those dollars have been taken out. I take a little different approach. If you say Water One receives about $23 million a year, and you start to take out the non-project appropriations, which includes the Water Development Commission budget, that's about $4 million per year, but then add Board of Control at $6.7 million and $1 million that goes for the Drinking Water SRF program, you're at a number of about $12, $13 million a year in non-project appropriations. Subtract that from $23 million, you're looking at only being able to fund $10 million worth of projects going forward beyond this biennium. And again, what I mentioned earlier, this 46 million is higher than I anticipated, but to a large extent, you're benefiting because we only had $10 million worth of construction appropriations in the last session. So, but going forward, that balance will decline. And Senator, you are exactly correct. Our ability to fund projects going forward into the future beyond this biennium is going to be compromised.
Say, once we raise the money.
What's that?
What's the real number?
Come out, that takes us the next 2 years.
Not right, because unless we change the.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. So it's the 1920, it's about $13.2 million for the biennium. That's a 2-year basis. And that is accounted for in that 180 million of active appropriations.
Any other comments on this water development account one summary? Harry?
So, Mr. Chairman, you go to the next page is account 2. If you would like, I will walk you through all those numbers, but it is the same concept in terms of starting with a cash balance, looking at revenues and expenditures for last year, outstanding commitments, and then the anticipated revenue into account 2 for 19, about 4.6 million, and for fiscal year 20 as well, same number. So our projection is that you have about $9 million available in account 2 for rehabilitation projects. That's a bigger number again than what you've seen in past years. So I think at least going forward for the next year, that's a good thing. But as we've talked about, reservoir rehab projects, which can be pretty expensive projects, if we get any of those in, that $9 million can be used up pretty quickly. And again, cautionary note from Andy is you probably don't want to obligate a full $9 million towards projects. But that remains to be seen in terms of what project applications we get in this fall. And then if there aren't any questions on account 2, Mr. Chairman, then account 3, which is simpler in that we don't have any loans outstanding on account 3. But you can see that the uncommitted balance as of July 1st this year, almost $51 million. The revenue that flows into account, about $775,000 per year in severance taxes, and then significant interest payment on the unspent balance. And so you have available not quite $57 million available for dams and reservoir projects in the state. Questions?
Hearing none. I'm sorry, Senator Driscoll.
Mr. Labonte, can you real quickly go through what the outstanding commitments are? The 129 million of the active.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So we have 4 reservoir projects that have been fully funded for construction. Alkali and Levitt, I can never keep the 2 straight. One was a $35 million appropriation, the other one $41 million. Middle Piney Reservoir is about a $12 million appropriation. And Big Sandy, looking to Jason, $8.5 million. So those are the 4 construction projects that have been funded. And then we have a number of other projects, about 10 or so projects in the planning / permitting design phases that would make up the balance. Okay, so.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Eklund.
Kind of on a little bit different subject. So we've had this raid on, as a senator referred to it, and I would agree it's a real drain on the water development budget. We also had money that was borrowed from water development that wasn't paid back. Could you refresh my memory on how much that was? I think it was 10 million, and what year it was and what account it was and some things.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Eklund, your memory is very good. And there have been in the past years dollars that were removed from Water Development Account 3, but they were ultimately to be repaid through fiscal year 15 and 16. Okay. It was in fiscal year 16 that the real budget crisis showed up or really started to appear, the most recent one. And that year there was $10 million, and I recall the governor's letter with regards to the cover letter on his supplemental budget to the legislature was to take $10 million out of account 3, and it was to be treated as a loan. His words. So believe me, in the office, Andy keeps a tab of that. So that, I believe, is the only outstanding loan with regards to the water development accounts. Other past borrowing that took place has been repaid, but it was a $10 million borrow, again, to supplement the general fund in fiscal year 16.
Thank you.
Other questions before we go to the reservoir operations and maintenance accounts? Harry?
So, Mr. Chairman, under tab J, there is a memo from myself to the commission. And as I had mentioned, you have a statutory obligation to review these O&M accounts, and if there are excess revenues in there, then they are to be moved, the way the statute reads, account to Water Development Account 1. On the front page, you see all of the accounts that we have: Fontenelle, Buffalo Bill, Palisades. There's a miscellaneous water account. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Keyhole is authorized, but we have never set up a Keyhole O&M account because the state does not have any ownership interest in accounts or space in Keyhole. Never been set up. We've never completed those negotiations. High Savory, Pathfinder, Glendo, and we've now added the Lake DeSmet Reservoir account based on the recent acquisition of those reservoir assets. I will, if you turn the page and go to the second document under this tab, so actually the third page under this divider, you see a background and history of reservoir operation and maintenance accounts. We developed that a couple of years ago for your information, but it gives you a lot of information about each of those accounts. Legislatively, when they were authorized, gives you a session law and chapter, what the original appropriation was into the account, if any, and then gives you, typical revenue that were received, typical expenses, and then also tells you or describes briefly the water assets. So you see in Fontenelle Reservoir, we have 120,000 acre feet of reservoir space. That's what that account is there to support. And so we've provided that for each of those, and you see on the second page of that, we've now added Lake DeSmet in terms of that. So that's just a basic information sheet for you. So I'm going to go back to my memo to you. Well, let me, before I get to the recommendations, if you then go another page, 2 pages into under the divider, you get to something entitled Fontenelle Reservoir Account. And we have one of these are the financial projection sheets that Andy and I use in terms of making projections into the future. The first part of every one of those is a 10-year history of expenditures and revenues into the account. So you see under Fontenelle, I'll start at the top, 2009. Bureau of Reclamation contract 6193. That is a loan repayment. So when we bought the second 60,000 acre feet of space under contract, we agreed to, I think that was a 30-year note, but it was $548,000 per year. The second one, contract 2474, is the second payment there. So those were paid every year. You then see investment income showing up. You see water contracts with Pacific Core, Church and Dwight Simplot, what those total for that year. That's the history, the last 10 years of history if we have it. Some of the newer accounts don't have 10 years of history. But if you get to the bottom of that page, which is actually page 2 of 2, you can see that as of the end of fiscal year 2018, that account has an active balance of $3,263,463. So that gives you a good picture of the revenue and expenditure picture, what that account incurs, what the typical expenses are. The next section in these projections are the 10-year projection, which are just that. They are projections. They are based on some assumptions, but we're doing a couple of things. We're taking that expenditure history. We're inflating those at 3% a year. We duplicate the revenue picture of what's going into that account. And we also start to bring in any large expenditures that we might see potentially out there in the future. So if you look at Fontenelle, you can see that the very bottom from 2020, and those projections are for 10 years, even though our accounts are intended to provide the O&M in perpetuity. These accounts go well beyond 10 years. They are, in essence, in perpetuity. But for the sake of this analysis, we go out 10 years. You can see under that 10-year projection, 2020 to 2022, there's a $16 million expenditure. That is for a Fontenelle riprap project. Should that project go forward, it's got a number of hurdles out there, including certainly commission endorsement and legislative approval. But as we look out 10 years, we believe that that is an expenditure that would be paid for out of this account. You also see just above that, that account can't withstand a $16 million expenditure. So we're at least showing a transfer from the Buffalo Bill account into Fontenelle, which is allowed for O&M and expenses to help pay for that project. That, as the note indicates, would require specific legislative approval. But again, we're dealing with projections at this point in time. And then the third part of these projections then are basically what conclusions we're drawing. And in Fontenelle, our conclusion is that the fund is stable with no excess funds available at this time. And that's key language, because if you, as the commission, determine that there are excess funds available, then the statute reads that with legislative approval, the excess funds would be moved to Water Development Account 1 for most of these accounts. So we have a set of projections for each of the reservoir accounts. You can see the next one is Buffalo Bill. I might walk through that because this is the one account that has a surplus of cash. You can see that end of 2018, that's a fiscal year, the account balance was $23,086,000 and some change. So when you get into that 10-year projection, we believe that there is excess cash in that account. And so one of the recommendations that I am making to you this year is that we transfer $5,500,000 from this account to Water Development Account 1. You also see in that projection, there's actually 3 transfers starting in 2020, 2021, and 2022. Yes, a total of $16 million to be transferred to Fontenelle for that riprap project. That's the biggest change. So that's how Fontenelle is, that projection. And even with that transfer this year, you can see through that 10-year projection, because we have a 2.4 loan payment that is paid into this account by WWPA, that at 2028, so going out 10 years for that projection, we would expect that balance would be at over $32 million. Now, you will see in subsequent years, as that account balance builds back up, that there will be recommendations from director to you that we probably will need to transfer other excess funds from this account, because again, we have very few expenses out of the account, and we're getting a $2.4 million payment from WWPA every year. However, that WWPA payment ends, or it's completed, in 2030. So in 2030, that revenue stream goes away in total.
Sure, guys. Well, where does that money come from is when we raised Buffalo Bill, we loaned the money at 11% interest to the federal government to do that extension. And then that'll be paid off in 2030 or somewhere. I'll be gone, but it'll be paid off.
Mr. Chairman, I would point out that the senator was very wise in negotiating that deal in the 1990s, because it's paying great dividends, certainly to this account and to the state of Wyoming. So, Mr. Chairman, you now know how we base the projections, how we come about, develop those. I'll go back to my memo, cover memo, page 2. which summarizes then the recommendations that Andy and myself are bringing to you today. And then on Friday, at your business meeting, we will ask you to take a affirmative action on any recommendations you want to act on. If you want to move forward with a transfer out of Buffalo Bill, the formal action will be done on Friday. So walking down through each of those accounts, Fontenelle Reservoir, fund is stable, no excess funds available at this time, no action. Buffalo Bill, we are asking, or we're recommending that there be a $5.5 million transfer to Water Development Account 1, considered excess. The other thing that can happen out of out of Buffalo Bill Reservoir is that we can move funds from that account to other reservoir O&M accounts that are lacking or are not, or are on a downward decline. So also out of Buffalo Bill, we're recommending that $75,000 be moved to the miscellaneous water investment account. And that particular account, again, if you look at the detailed projection sheet, it's referenced that that account cannot exceed $100,000. But we have a contract with City of Cheyenne to store their excess Stage 2 water in that account and then market that account. And as a result of that, we pay an O&M charge to Cheyenne, who pays an O&M charge to the Bureau of Reclamation. That charge really overwhelms the miscellaneous revenue account. And so we need to supplement that account so we can continue to make our obligations to Cheyenne. So that's a $75,000 recommended transfer. And then we are also recommending, now that Middle Piney Reservoir is under construction, that's a reservoir that the state of Wyoming is the primary sponsor for and responsible for. So I will be recommending to you this fall at the November meeting that we set up a reservoir O&M account for Middle Piney Reservoir. And I would like to start that with a $500,000 transfer from Buffalo Bill account. So those are the three recommendations out of Buffalo Bill. Palisades, no excess funds available at this time. Miscellaneous water investment account, you see the recommended transfer of $75,000 into that account. We also show you a note that at least at 2031, the state will take over O&M, or be responsible for O&M charges out of Park Reservoir. That's a project that we funded in the 1990s. And out of that, the state got an account, minimum pool account in that reservoir for fishery purposes, and an account that's available for minimum flow releases out of the reservoir for fishery purposes. But we will have an O&M obligation starting there. Lost my place. What did I say? 2031. Even though that's beyond the 10-year planning horizon in this document, I've talked to Andy, and we want to keep it in here so that it's not lost. Right now, it shows up in a statute out of the 1990s, but we definitely don't want that lost in terms of going forward. So we'll continue to carry that as just a note, basically. High Savory, we view it as stable. Pathfinder modification account. And if I go to the Pathfinder account, that current balance, $9,447,000. However, the current statutes do not provide a provision for moving excess funds from Pathfinder to Water Development Account 1. The way the statute, it does for all of the accounts I've talked about thus far, but for Pathfinder, Glendo, and now Lake DeSmet, there is no provision to do that. So we're not making a recommendation as to excess funds there. Glendo, that account balance is sitting at $903,000. That one I would not consider anything excess. And then Lake DeSmet was just started. It has a balance of about $2 million. So the only recommendations that I have for you are concerning Buffalo Bill Reservoir, and they are the three then that I outlined for you. So, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions at this point.
Questions for Harry?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, Harry, could you provide us what all the expenditures in the miscellaneous water account are? Is that in here someplace?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in that package should be a 10-year projection for the miscellaneous water investment account. The biggest charge is the Board of Public Utilities with Cheyenne that I mentioned, which deals with Semino, OM, and R, about $25,000 per year. You can see some other, it's more a small revenue. You know, whenever a community using a water development funded project sells water outside their jurisdiction, they pay part of that back to the state. We put it into the miscellaneous account if that's appropriate. But the we were also paying, I'm looking at that account now. 2013, there was a Nebraska taxes charge, about $5,781. That dealt with property that the state of Wyoming had acquired for mitigation for a 404 permit for the Deer Creek project. And we continue to pay taxes on that. Ultimately, we have donated that land to the Platte River Recovery, as was dictated out of the Nebraska v. Wyoming Supreme Court decree. So that charge has gone away. So you can see since 2013, the only expenditures have been for Board of Public Utilities sharing the O&M charges out of Semino Reservoir.
Well, so if you can, Mr. Chairman, if I may, how does that arrangement work that we're paying for the Board of Public Utilities, or is it just a pass-through? How does that actually work?
So, Mr. Chairman, and it's been a while since I looked at that agreement, but Cheyenne has established a storage account in Semino Reservoir where they can bring their extra stage 2 water down. And in a very dry year, they would be able to rely upon that water. In the meantime, as that water sits in the account, there is a marketing agreement between Water Development and the City of Cheyenne that if we're able to sell any of that water to other water users in the basin, and because it is Colorado River water moved across the divide into the Platte, it has to be used in Wyoming. That's a compact provision. But if, say, we were to sell that some of that water to Sinclair in a water short year, then Cheyenne and Water Development share in that revenue. The issue has been is that we have not had any water sales out of that account.
So, real quick on the actual payment to BOR for that account, does the Cheyenne Board of Public Utilities, we're kicking in money to store their water? Is that the way I understand it?
Paying a portion of their O&M charge to store that water with the provision that we're able to sell that water and then derive a revenue into the water development program. The issue of at least the last few years is that it's been wet enough in the basin that there really isn't a demand for that water. But it is an account of water that could be used for any purposes in the Platte River Basin in Wyoming.
Mr. Chairman, just to continue, but we've never sold any water out of that account. Is that correct? I don't see it on the revenue side where we've sold any of that. So we're looking at a $25,000 a year expenditure, but we've never derived any revenue associated with the sales of that. So the next question, Mr. Chairman, is how does this play into the current 13-year increment, the Platte River Recovery Program, where the state of Wyoming's on the hook for another 30,000 acre feet of water? or does it come into play at all?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, it cannot come into, that's a use in Nebraska. To be used in the compact state, meaning Wyoming in this case. It's not shown on this history because it predates 2009. I believe that some of this water was used to meet a portion of the decree requirements in Wyoming. In terms, well, it wasn't used for replacement water, but it was used to backstop Wyoming's use.
Triangle for the pumping.
Triangle. Wyoming gets 25% of the natural flow or replacement water. So I believe it's been used for that, but it has not been actively, there just hasn't been a demand for it. It could be used by City of Casper, for example, in the event of an allocation year. But we've also set up a Pathfinder account to help those municipalities. To me, the probably the most likely large water user would be the Sinclair Refinery, and they have post 1904 water rights. So if there is an allocation year in the plat, which would put a call on for the federal reservoirs for Pathfinder, and they needed to buy water, this account could be used for that and could be sold for them. But you are correct. You're not seeing any revenue as a result of that account.
And just to remind me, Mr. Chairman, if I can continue, if we sell water, we get a percentage of that, and the City of Cheyenne gets a percentage of that. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct, but I cannot give you the percentages today. Because it's been a long time since I looked at that agreement.
The question that begs to be asked then is how come we're paying 100% of the storage cost, but we only get a percentage of the revenue? So,
Mr. Chairman, we are only paying a percentage of the O&M charges. Cheyenne also pays a charge. This is only a partial charge.
Are those, Mr. Chairman, are those percentages the same? Do we share equitably in the cost plus equitably in the revenues?
So, Mr. Chairman, because I haven't looked at that agreement in a number of years, it is a cost-sharing arrangement that is, the O&M is commensurate with our revenue share, also with Cheyenne. But I do not have those percentages, and I'd be happy to provide that for information.
If you would.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you have more on the operations and maintenance accounts?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's my summary. And like I said, on Friday, I will recommend to you those 3 recommendations with regards to the Buffalo Bill account. And then the commission, whatever recommendations you make, will then be forwarded on to Joint Ag and Joint Appropriations.
Senator Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Harry, I was just curious, why aren't we recommending to fund the RIPRAP project yet? Is that something we have to wait for another biennium?
So Mr. Chairman, Senator, we're not in a position to move that project forward on construction. And so we are just now we'll be completing shortly the feasibility study. The next step will be a NEPA process with the Bureau of Reclamation. And before we move forward with that construction project, there will need to be an agreement put in place between the state of Wyoming and the Bureau of Reclamation, because the RIPRAP project will then make available about an 80,000 acre foot pool in the bottom of the reservoir. And if Wyoming's going to invest $16 million in that project, then I want to make sure that we get that's my position, all of that water is then available for Wyoming use. So those negotiations have not taken place. Once NEPA and that contract are put in place, then we'll be ready to proceed with the construction project. And then we'll look at the potential transfer of those dollars. Okay.
Other questions of Harry on this presentation? All right. Hearing none, we'll move on to new planning project process, and I suspect Barry will tell us all about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Commission, Select Water. I'm going to walk you through, give you an update on the new planning project process. I think you know that the old process is gone and we are now under the new process. So, yay, I hear a yay. So, so let me walk you through, and if you refer to tab K, one handout, and I try to make it real succinct and concise so that everything's on one page to lay it out for you where we're at. Listed at the top of the page, you'll see 7 planning projects that have received preliminary approval by the Commission. And if you remember, we started actually with 10 project applications that came in the door by our new deadline, March 1st of this year. And then at your May meeting, the Commission took action to eliminate 4 of those projects. They fell out. And you vetted those projects, and those fell out, did not receive approval. So that brought us down to 6 projects. And then at the June meeting, you added in the new project that was being proposed, the Lake DeSmet project. So that brought us to 7 projects. So that's where we are today. But because we already had made commissioner assignments on those that fell out, and then we also have one commissioner that's unable to be with us in October, we had to do some reassignments and new assignments, and you'll see those in blue there. So you've got the 7 projects proposed to go forward with consultant selection. And in blue are the new assignments that we had to make. And the only new project was Lake DeSmet, but the other 2 projects we had to make a reassignment. So hopefully let me know if there's any issues with that, but that's what we're planning to go forward unless somebody tells me otherwise. So then we move into the consultant selection timeline. And I've tried to make it, pretty methodical here so you can see. First, the RFPs went out, but I should tell you first, back up a little bit. We did advertisements in June and July for these projects, for the 7 projects. And even though the Lake DeSmet project came in later, we were able to sync everything up. Katie got those advertisements out. Those advertisements ran in June and July, and we sought interest on those projects during that time period. And firms had to have to us their statements of interest, statements of qualification by June 26th for 6 of the projects, and then the Lake DeSmet project July 17th. So those all came in the door. And as I said, they're all synced up now, so we can go forward with the process with all 7 projects. A couple factoids, I always like to pass on some factoids for what it's worth, department. It's kind of interesting. 7 projects, we got 35 submissions total. Okay. And you might say, well, how does that compare to earlier in the year? You got to remember that we were doing this only a few months ago under the old process, and now we're doing it under the new process to get everything aligned and going forward. Well, earlier in the year, when we were doing this back in January, February, and so forth, we had 19 projects and we had 91 submissions. Okay. Now under the new process, because it's short and abbreviated to get up to speed in this new process, because we had to start earlier. 7 projects, 35 submissions. If we look at the projects themselves, it ranged how many firms came in on each project. That's always kind of interesting. The LaPrelle project was the one that only received 2 firms that were interested. And on the other end of the spectrum, the Torrington Water Master Plan project received 9 firms that were interested chasing that project. Average number of submissions per project is 5. After the shortlisting, which was done by our commission, I did send out an email when that was going on and the process and so forth. We have 31 submissions still standing, so only 4 were eliminated, or 11% were eliminated. And interesting is 94% of those are from in-state firms. Okay, that's always interesting. And you might want to know how that compares for earlier in the year when we had the larger number of projects. At that time, we had 75% in-state firms. So now we're up to 94% this go around, in-state firms. If we look by firm, of the 35 submissions, 23 different firms came in on these projects. 23 different firms. We have 15 firms chasing 1 project, 4 firms chasing 2 projects, and 4 firms chasing 3 projects. So what that tells me is that we have firms that are being very strategic in what they're doing and chasing these projects. We don't have anybody that's trying to shotgun approach, bottom line. Currently, only 3 firms have been eliminated, so we have 20 firms still on the hunt on these projects. So moving on, back to the selection timeline in the center there, you'll see that RFPs went out on Tuesday, July 24th to all 7 projects. And of particular note, remember, under the new process, we did not establish budgets, okay? No budgets. There was nothing in the advertisements or anything that said that here's the budget for these projects. So it's what the market will bear here. So the 24 RFPs went out with no dollar amounts assigned. And then proposals are due in our office next Friday at 1 o'clock. Okay, and that's firm. We have to have those by 1 o'clock. So we're expecting submittals. They've been coming in, but there'll be more by next week. And then they will be summarily distributed to the selection teams. And then here, and I put this in yellow, very important, proposal rankings due to our office Monday, September 17th at 5 p.m. And we've got to be firm on that because we will have, the next day, we will have firms calling us, do I get an interview? Okay, so it's very important. We have to have that. Besides that, Katie will chase you down. Isn't that right, Katie? She will, and it could get ugly, and I'm not going to be a part of it. So anyway, 5 o'clock. We need to have those. But now the good thing for your standpoint, from the commissioners, from reviewing those proposals, what's really nice, I mean, from a review standpoint, obviously there's less projects, less proposals. But the bigger thing I want to bring to your attention is, and something that we heard from you, is that, last go around, you had only 7 to 10 days to review proposals. Thankfully, under this new process, we built in more time. So you've got 3 weeks to review proposals. So hopefully that'll really help things, I think. You'll have 3 weeks to review those proposals. So anyway, that's the timeline. And then I've listed there on the bottom the interview schedule itself, because we have seven different selections that we need to do. We can do all those in one day. So we don't have to drag this out 2-3 days. It'll be one day, Thursday, October 4th, with the commission meeting being the next day, October 5th. And you see there lined up, we'll do 2 in the morning. 2 sets of interviews in the morning where we'll need 4 commissioners, and we'll need Commissioners Bettis, Lancaster, Geis, and Wagner will need to be there in the morning. 6 of you have off that morning. Will not need to be in Cheyenne for interviews. But then in the afternoon, we have 4 sets of interviews concurrently. We'll need 8 commissioners, and then 2 of you have off that afternoon. Okay. So, and then also I should mention 3 commissioners. Congratulations, Commissioners Bettis, Geis, and Wagner. You have interviews both morning and afternoon. So thank you for your service there. You're very welcome. One thing I did want to mention, and you'll see off to the side there, the Pearl Project, Irrigation District Rehab. That project, it was the project I mentioned that we only had 2 firms that were in the hunt on. Unfortunately, one of those 2 firms has pulled out. So now we're down to 1 firm. So what it was decided, and talking with the commissioners involved with that project, is they are going to meet with the firm still interested in the project that evening at 6 o'clock. So thank you, Commissioners Bud Phelan and Wagner. Appreciate you willing to meet in the evening to get this done. So that's the process. I think that's it, and I'll stand for any questions.
Questions? Commissioner Suker?
Barry, are you developing an internal estimate for these projects so we have a comparable?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time.
Are you developing a comparable engineer's estimate or an estimate on these projects so that we have a comparable of maybe what we're saving or not saving, something internal?
No, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Select Water, that was actually discussed early on. Kind of went back and forth on that, but the final decision was that staff would not develop those type of estimates up front. We would not be doing that. That would be discoverable. Anybody could miss. Yes.
Fallon?
I didn't think that. I thought that you guys were going to do some preliminary estimates or something that you could give to the commission so that we could look at, so that we know what the heck that we're looking at. I mean, I didn't think you were just going to say, here you go, good luck. I mean, you don't want me doing that.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding of the direction I thought we received, and certainly have the director chime in here, and that was discussed. I know this was discussed. Should we go ahead and create budgets, what we think would be, so we know the savings? And the final decision was that no, that we should not do that.
Mr. Chairman. Just say, Commissioner Zucker, did you have anything further?
Well, I guess with our new system, it would certainly be nice if we knew if we had indeed created a savings. And I guess with that said, if we don't have it, I guess we'll never know.
Bettis?
Yeah, it was my understanding, and I guess I can concur a little bit with Barry, that we were going to kind of go with the Hicks analysis of having these guys do their own thing without us putting a number to it. But by the same token, I thought that there was some discussion about the staff putting together some rough numbers so that, and I guess by we, I'm not saying commission, but the division would know that when these guys come in with a number that it, I guess, was in the ballpark.
Barry? would it be too late to do that or too difficult?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I was getting some information on the past question. We can go back to that. But question is, staff, we had not intended to develop budgets going forward. I think if the commission desires that, we can certainly do that. It's information that won't be used at all in terms of the appropriation, but we're kind of just, because this is a new process, we're kind of working along with it. Is it information that's needed? Probably not, but if you would like that as part of your deliberations, and certainly I think, I'll take a master plan, for example. We would look at what similar costs that master plans have cost in the past to give you a sense. But I think there was some criticism that our budgets in the past were not based on necessarily real costs, but we certainly know that consultants will charge these many hours and here's their rates. So I think if the commission desires that, we will have staff do that. The one thing that Barry and I have talked about is that when we develop a document, it becomes a public document. And so if consultants are then developing their budget and they know that we have developed our own budget, would that generate a public records request? Don't know. Is it still in the deliberative process that we might be able to protect that? Possibly. That'll be a legal question for Daniel. But I guess we can go forward with those if that's your desire. But
sure, guys.
How does YDOT bid theirs? Those companies, they don't, YDOT doesn't give a preliminary contract. What do they think costs to build that road? I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
so, Mr. Chairman, and I'm by YDOT's next door, as I understand it, but I am not a YDOT expert, but I do know that in their project funding, it's coming predominantly from the Federal Highway Administration and more in the form of a block grant. We have legislators here and certainly Joint Appropriation Commission members. So I don't think their projects go through an individual project appropriation like water development does. And so they're able to use, in essence, a block grant approach. We're going to allocate so many dollars for a particular project. So.
Go ahead.
I know that YDOT, they bid those projects and they go down to them hearings, and I just wonder
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a distinction. We're talking about planning projects, which are performed by consulting engineers. YDOT does do some of that work where they farm the consulting engineering work out, but I don't know whether they develop a budget ahead of them accepting proposals from consultants. I just don't know.
Harry, let me comment, and maybe Commissioner Zucker can back me up a little on that.
Larry's got his hand up.
Okay.
I have a question.
Well, let me just make this comment. The entities, public entities I'm used to dealing with, they do not give a figure to the bidders, but they have an internal one to see, mainly tied to budget, see if something's over budget or under budget. And that's what I'm used to. However, I don't think we'd want to do that if it's subject to a public records request, which I assume it would not be, but we'd look to Daniel for that. But that's my comment. Senator Hicks?
Exactly the same way with special districts. I mean, we bid a lot of projects right now. Our engineer puts an estimate, but that's not what I wanted to say. Is there's another way to mine the data that Commissioner Seekin asked is how do we make that comparison? And so historically, if you will look, because we appropriated the money and let's say we had 5 proposals, those 5 proposals usually came in with a couple percentage points of where they're at. So you've got that data. I think what you're going to see right now is you're going to see a much broader spread in the high and the low, which will answer the question, are we saving money? It may take 2 years to get enough data. I mean, if we only got 9 projects here and one of them's only got one bidder, you're going to be able to mine that data. It may take 2 years to get enough through the process, but you're going to be able to look and say, why did we have only a 1 or 2% variation from the high to the low? And now we've got a 20% or a 40%. That should answer that question. Are we saving money?
Phil?
Well, and I think maybe we're mixing apples and oranges. I'm not asking for some budget before we read the proposals because we don't see the budgets when we read the proposals anyway. What I want to have from the staff that I work with is when we sit down at consultant selection, if they can, we look at their budget, at the consultant budget, and then I want to be able to ask, you or Brian or whoever is the staff guy, I want them to have in mind, this budget is adequate, this budget is not. So I'm not asking to prepare something that might show up under FOIA sometime, but I do think it's fair that the commissioners, when we see the consultant budget, be able to say to the staff guys, so what do you think? Is this legitimate, or are they spending too much money here? And so that's what I think needs to occur, not some formal fancy, I'm not trying to make you guys do a ton of work.
Mr. Chair, just one comment to go along with that. The Highway Department, which I've done a lot of work for, yes, they do. They achieve a budget. And they do what they call an engineer's estimate. And what they do, if the contractor, in this case, contractors are contractors, if they open their bids and all the contracts are contractors' prices are maybe, I'll use 10%, over top of their engineer's estimate, they won't award it. Okay, because it's not appropriated within their budget. And in this case, if we had an item here that we allocated, and we have to have budget somewhere, if we had an item and it was a reservoir or anything else, and we budgeted 10 million for, and it come in at 20 million, I'm just using the engineer. Now talking about that, would we still award that contract to that engineer? That's why in determining a value internally that doesn't go out, it would give us guidance, because we as commissioners would not want to sit and make a decision based on a cost that maybe we had one engineer bid on it and he knew that, and we got some of that right today. And he comes in knowingly that he's the only one, and he excels that price by 5 million. I'm using numbers. And we sit here not knowing what the estimate should be, and we make that award. Now, maybe we put that on the back blanket and we say, no, we're not going to do that this time. We'll do it next time. We'll rebid it. We'll get different costs. All these allocations here don't have to be done in 1 year, is what I'm saying. Do they? I mean, if these things are high, we find a high job, can't we kick it out and say, we'll do it next year, or we'll rebid it, or we'll pick our selection of our engineer next year? So that's where I'm at. Because if we don't have a little bit of an understanding of what that project should cost, it's hard for us to determine and make an award based on you not having at least an engineer's estimate behind the case. We don't have to publish it. Don't want to publish. That's the reason that we change. But that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure my memory about this new process is accurate. We're still not doing low bid. Is that correct? I mean, we're doing best qualified, best proposal. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Seekin, that is correct. There's a whole bundle of criteria that you are to consider, price being one of them, but you are not mandated to award to the lowest cost proposal.
Just want to make sure, because with this new, it's important, especially when we're getting proposals in differently than we had before without knowing what a budget is. So
fair to say that the answer to this may be that the staff person on each project will have an idea of what they think a price should be. Doesn't have to be formal or printed, but they would have their own informal estimate as part of that interview process. Would that, if that's fair, Harry, I think it would work for everybody.
Mr. Chairman, that's fine. So what we will ask is the project manager to come to the interviews with a budget that they have developed, an informal budget, so that they can then judge or provide to you a reasonableness estimate as to whether the cost proposals are high, low, or whatever. You would have at least a staff opinion as to whether or not the proposals are
That's
reasonable.
all I think it should be, Mr. Chairman. I just think that's a guideline for us to make a valid decision based on your staff's past history, because you guys have history on that. You got to have a lot of it. So we'd rely on that. But an undisclosed estimate to the meeting that we would.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, and I think that there's an unanswered question here that needs to be answered, and you brought that up. And so the question would be, why would water development's development of an engineer's estimate, as Commissioner Suker is any different as far as information that municipal governments, county governments, special districts, as you alluded to, that's the normal process. All other governments are doing this. I'm not aware that was ever, anybody's ever filed a Freedom of Information request. But it comes back to a legal discussion from the Attorney General. I think we need that question answered going forward, is if the Water Development Office develops an engineer's estimate, because all the other subdivisions of government are doing this right now in the state of Wyoming. We do it routinely. As a special district in the state of Wyoming, we don't give that information out to the contractors. This is what the municipal and county governments are doing. So I think we need a final resolution through the Attorney General's office, that the commission could ask for, is to get the legal research. Why would this be any different for water development?
I think we're asking for an informal estimate, so it wouldn't necessarily be written down, but I don't think that stops us from asking the AG's office to come back with an answer to that. Harry, do you have any problem with that?
Address that, I'd be happy to. We could even do a quick little executive session on Friday if we have time.
Could be probably part of deliberative process, but we'd let you answer that. Okay. All right. Well, two things. One, the most important thing Barry said is that instead of having 10 days to review these proposals on the last day, I now have 3 weeks to review these proposals on the last day. So it's good. And I'm going to take a break here till 3:30.
We can too.
We can all take a break till 3:30. Okay. Already took one. We'll come back for the planning or the construction updates.
No, I'm good.
Commissioner Seacon had a question. We'll start with that.
Thank you. Thank you. Harry, we kind of skimmed over that $10 million loan from account 3 back in our financial piece. Is it a loan or is it, is it a loan or were there loan documents prepared, or is this something that at some point everyone's going to have amnesia?
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Seacon, there is not a promissory note that has been issued from the legislature to water development. I don't think they issue those kinds of things. It was characterized as a loan, first suggested by Governor Meade.
Or was it characterized as a loan?
In a cover letter that accompanied his budget submittal to the legislature. And so we could produce certainly a copy of that. But I think, from my perspective, the important thing is that when I do get a chance to mention that, I will certainly do that, certainly in the presence of legislators.
Was it up to the Select Water to make a recommendation to the legislature? I guess I'm asking what the process is about when and how that 10 million may or may not be paid back. I guess I'm asking what, or are some hoping that everyone has amnesia about it, I guess.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think what has happened in the past when money has been borrowed is that there was certainly a memory among legislators that, yes, this was taken out of a water development account, and when revenue was available, they then took an action to put it back in. And that's really a budgetary process, starts with joint appropriations.
It's like a reminder from the director to maybe Select Water, and then Select Water has to carry the ball from there. Is that kind of what happens?
Yeah, I don't think it was so much from Select Water, but certainly they played a role in supporting that. But it is, when the last one that I'm looking at, which was 2015-16, where they paid back about 38 million, as I recall, to Water 1 and Water 3. That it came out of a budgetary process. So it was embedded in the process, and these dollars are going to water development and characterized as a loan repayment. But it took the memory of...
Back in 1996, why they took money out of water development to balance the budget. And then around 2001 or 2, and we applied to the general fund to get part of it back, and took us about 3 or 4 years to get it back. And then again, I'm going to think about around 2012 or something, they raided the water account again, and I don't know if we ever got that back or not.
So, Mr. Chairman, I believe that we did, because that was the 38 million in round numbers that was to be paid back in the 2015-16 biennium. We got the first half of that in fiscal year 15. And then the second payment of that, which was to come back to water development, was then shorted 10 million based on, okay, we now have another budget issue. We've got to balance the general fund. So they took it out of that last repayment. So I believe that if I were to call it a loan portfolio, it is just a $10 million obligation at this point in time that's been taken out of Water 1 or Water 3 and not paid back. And Mr. Chairman, as I talk to people, I do characterize the diversions that have gone to the state engineer's office, which now total about $20 million. If you look at last fiscal year and this current biennium, we're at about 20 million there. So there's been $30 million taken from water development accounts in the last 3 years, basically.
And they stole it.
Senator Hicks, I think Harry has some information on that O&M account in Seminole.
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks called Andy, who has that contract in her office. She looked it up. The cost sharing arrangement is so for expenditures and any revenue derived from this water storage account, water development is paying 62.7% of the expenditure cost. That would make Board of Public Utilities at 37.3%. And any revenue that comes back into as a result of water sales would be split in the same percentages. Water development receiving 62.7%. And I don't have the history because this comes back out of the Stage 2 project, but I can tell you that any of the repayment for revenues derived from Water Development Commission projects that a sponsor may have in sales come back in the same percentages as the grant loans that were offered. And that's 67%, 33% currently. So I'm thinking that maybe on the Stage 2 financing, it was 62.7% direct appropriation to Cheyenne for Stage 2. I don't know that for a fact, but it seems to mirror that model.
Thank you.
That brings us to the update on the construction projects. Brian.
Mr. Chairman, under tab L, we have 6 construction projects to report on. The first project is the Gillette Regional Extensions. This is the first phase to the district extensions to connect. There was 8 districts to the regional system. This project is advanced to the closeout, and that summary is on the back side of that sheet. So you'll see a final project cost of a little over $8 million. WWDC's funding share was $383,811. On this particular project, we're reverting back just a little over $1 million back into account 1.
Any questions on that account, that project? Brian?
The next project is the Jeffrey City Water System Improvements Project. This project has also advanced to the closeout stage. Final project cost was $561,970. Our funding share was $352,526.26. Back $66,223.74 back into account 1. The next project is the Lusk Water System Improvements 2018 project. This project is advanced to the engineering design phase. The engineer is AVI Engineering. They've got a design fee of $61,366, construction administration fee of $57,134, for a total fee of $118,500. And this agreement was signed on July 3rd of this year. The next project is the Pine Haven Well and Tank Project. This project is advanced to the construction phase. We have 2 construction listings on the bottom of page 1 here. The first was the tank and transmission line. That was bid back in October of last year. This report is to bring forth the construction well, which there was a bid opening on February 27th. There was 2 bidders. The Hydro Resources was the low bidder. Engineer's estimate was $908,546. The contractor's amount was $1,141,505. You can see over on the right, the range was $1.14 million to $1.58 million.
And Mr. Chairman, question.
Yes, Senator. Let's go.
How many dollars in total do we have tied up in this well and pipeline start to finish?
Oh, Mr. Chairman. You have a calculator on you? Just my phone. That's all I've got too. In rough
Referring
numbers.
to the Pine Haven?
Oh.
So, Mr.
Yes, sir. Yeah, Pine Haven.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll also point out that this is a project that we will look at tomorrow on our tour as we go through Pine Haven.
So, Mr. Chairman, in rough numbers, it looks like about $3.5 million. Again, I'm just adding in my head the 2 construction projects that were bid and awarded, and the engineering contract amount for just short of $354,000. But so, again, approximately $3.5 million.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. You're talking about 500,000 to $1 million on the wells where the bids came. Am I correct on that?
Mr. Chairman, the range of bids was 1.14 million to 1.58 million.
Okay, so a little over $1 million.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman, can I keep going? And this is for Madison well, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
How is it the Pine Haven's drilling a Madison well so much cheaper than the other wells we're drilling?
Mr. Chairman, this particular well it's a lot smaller than the Madison wells for the city of Gillette. I'm not sure what the target yield is on this particular well, but the Gillette well, the target yields 1,400 gallons a minute for each well. So these are very large wells. And I'm not sure on this particular well either what the total depth is. Commissioner Sucre might be able to answer some of those questions.
Chair, yeah, Brian, to your answer into Ogden's question, we are expecting 350 gallon a minute out of these wells. The Gillette Madison is upward over 1,000. 1,400, yeah. So, yeah, this is significantly smaller, a smaller casing. The fracking is totally maybe different. We don't know whether we're going to frack or not. Depends on our yield, but we're only permitted through the state of Wyoming for 350 gallon a minute. So significantly different, but the depth is the same. We're down there in the same range on the depth. The casing diameter is different, so that's significantly a cost differential in the well.
Chairman, a follow-up. And I guess that's exactly, I kind of knew where we were going to be heading. So if we look at 1,400 gallon a minute versus 13 or 350, we're talking about $13 million per well on equivalent of the Gillette wells. And, you know, if you just take it roughly divide it by 4, 350, 700, 1,400 gallons, you multiply it by 4, the costs all of a sudden jump up to about $12, $13 million. And my question is back to regional water systems and long term, are we more efficient to keep drilling 350 gallon wells and scattering them out through the region? Or are we more efficient to spend our state money drilling wells that produce 1,400 gallon a minute and linking them together? And then when a well goes down, they're all there with a joint supply that works and they're able to blend water with qualities. And I'm not saying it for anything on this project. It's just kind of a point of thought of where we're at when you look at efficiencies. If you were running a business, it's like buying 6 trucks to deliver freight rather than using 1 truck to deliver the freight. And I really do think this committee long-term needs to look at efficiencies on what we're spending money on, because it does add up a lot of cost.
So, Mr. Chairman, a couple of thoughts. The Gillette Madison wells were not at 13 million. They're more on the order of 5 million each. Okay, so I mean, proportionally going up. The other thing I would say is we do look, a regional solution only makes sense in certain circumstances. And of course, the longer you are from a source, then maybe regional doesn't make as much sense. We would look at that in planning studies. In this case, in Gillette's case, Gillette had an identified need for additional water supplies. They looked at developing a well field south of town, as I mentioned, Fort Union wells. Ultimately was determined that to go to the Madison as a more reliable or a more prolific source. But in terms of other, I'm thinking in and around Gillette, the Madison's not available. They're going to the Fort Union, which is an aquifer that's in distress. That aquifer is declining, which is why Gillette has moved outwards. So, but in a Pine Haven case, I think it makes perfect sense that, and it was looked at, should Pine Haven connect to the Madison well system or Madison pipeline project? Ultimately, I don't recall what the cost differential was, but it was similar, and Pine Haven elected to stay with a Madison well.
Chairman, you actually kind of turned the argument exactly. I think the Gillette Madison project's a great project. Have from the start, I've supported it. I think it's a phenomenal project. And I think the wells are a bargain at $5 million a piece. They produce, and that was my exact point, they produce approximately 4 times the water at 5 million that we're going to produce at 3.5 million. And as Pine Haven grows, and as Moorcroft grows, and as other towns grow, I think we're going to see more $3.5 million wells pop up. And my question is, are we further ahead to spend part of that money and basically force, Larry might argue with me, Commissioner Suker, but should we actually be building pipeline and saying we can drill more wells and tie it into a system where everybody benefits, not just a specific piece, but they all do. And then we can move water back and forth between entities, which right now, if Pine Haven grows and we hit whatever, they're going to be back for another 3.5 million. And if we develop another Gillette Madison well, which I'm in favor of, by the way, this is being portrayed that I'm opposed to it. I'm not. I'd way rather see us drill another $5 million well and hook everybody into it and have excess capacity than to keep drilling $3.5 million wells over and over. And we will. We're going to have more of them come from these towns. And I think for us as taking care of taxpayer money, it makes a bargain for everybody when we pay 2 to 1 on it. It makes it cheaper for them to say, I don't want to deal with a regional system. I want to deal with my own. My kids would both like to do the same thing on the ranch. But the truth is, the efficiencies come when you make them work together. And I think we've seen that regional systems work. Gillette's is a perfect example of it. Look at all the taps we've got and all that's in it. It's a great system. That's one of the problems I've had is everybody thinks I'm opposed to the system. I think it's a model. It's a model for the state and it works. So why aren't we looking at making other people be a part of the system and making these costs? Because there's no way you can cheat in actual cost. I don't care if it's Pine Haven, Moorcroft, Rosette, or Gillette. Cost to run a well field or cost to run a well field. And the Madison well costs similar costs. And my guess are that the Gillette wells that are big wells cost less money per gallon produced than the little wells we're drilling. And I think we ought to be looking at that long term, not now, but long term as these guys come to us. Why aren't we looking at being able to provide them more water rather than drill them more wells and fractionalize further?
So, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, in terms of the 2 projects that have been awarded, the tank and transmission line would be required by Pine Haven. There's only a short piece of transmission line. That would be required whether you're connected to the Madison pipeline or if you have a new well. So really the cost analysis that would take place is it more cost effective to drill an additional well for Pine Haven versus to build several miles of transmission line?
It was 8 miles, Harry.
How many miles?
About approximately 8 miles.
8 miles.
Just
and that
close.
analysis was done. I don't recall the comparison.
I do, I can answer that. We still had to build a tank, and that's a problem. We couldn't just get by with the transmission line, due to storage. We had to create storage. So if you look at it, yes, we are going to put 1.1 million in that Madison well. Now, I'm not going to say that that's all that well is going to produce. That well very well could be capable of 650 gallon a minute. And if we acid frac it, it may go up from there. But I'm just saying that that's what we are allowed to pump out of that well with the permitting process that we have today. So if you look at that, there was approximately, according to our level 2 study, approximately $2 million difference from going to the pipeline on the Gillette Madison than there was to drill the well. Now, take the tank away, because the tank would need it regardless, because we had low pressures. And I blame that to this commission right here of about 14 or 15 years ago. When the commission done the study the last time for Pine Haven, they put a tank on ground level. Well, it doesn't give you any pressure unless you put a pump on it. So now we are taking that, not the same tank, but we're taking the same basic volumetric part of that tank and elevating it to get our fire protection and our water pressure needs. So if you look at all of it, yes, and I can show you in the study. Now, the study has one critical problem, and I think I pointed it out. It showed drilling the Madison well for $500,000, $500,000. No, couldn't be done. We knew it when we got the study. I was aware of it. That's why I come back to the commission, got additional funds. Should have been 1.1. Maybe that would have taken us a little different direction at the time, but the study was wrong. So anyway, with that, that's what we're working with. And you'll know tomorrow a lot more when you get to see the principal items. And if you want the data, we can have that there too.
Chairman, I don't need it. I support your project the way it is. I was talking more long-term as we go out is we're going to continue to do these type projects, and back to the $2 million. That's the price of one more well, basically, with a little bit of inflation. And my feeling is we need to look at the long-term picture a lot more than looking at today when we need this water. And I don't know what Pine Haven has for backup water, but if we were in a true regional system, it'd give them complete duplicity that we'd be able to pull water out of another source to get there rather than an emergency basis going and drilling another well or having a problem. And I really do like the thought of the big Madison wells. I understand them, and I think they're the answer. I in truth think that Gillette well field should be expanded, and it should provide water to a lot more. That's what makes economic sense for water development for the state of Wyoming. It might not make sense to cities and towns because they lose some control over their water system, but the efficiencies are great. So no, I have no questions about what you're doing. I read the level 2 study and I understood it. I had talked some at the time about tapping into the Madison with it. And like I said, I think as we look forward, we really need to look at the impacts. Our dollars get shorter and shorter, and how do we make them stretch further when we get 20, 30, 40 years out, not today.
Guys?
Well, the other thing we really got to worry about is what the recharge of that Madison formation is. You drill Apollo wells. I remember Hereford, Texas, down there in the 50s, 60s. They put in a brand new sugar factory and everything down there, and they drained that Ogallala aquifer in 10 years. You've got to look at the recharge before you punch too many more wells down there.
Chairman, one last on that. Doesn't matter. We're putting straws in. It's the recharge. It doesn't matter if the well's in Pine Haven or on top of the hill or at my place. That's just Madison. And right now it's the choice to go to for all of Northeast Wyoming. So I share your fears on recharge, but that's trains left the station. We're continuing to drill wells, and I suspicion that's why they permitted you at 350. The original Gillette field's permitted at 6,500 gallon a minute, and it might be able to produce more. I don't know. But the state engineer's office has capped these wells as they permit them.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, the next project that Brian's going to talk about is another perfect example. Involves a Madison well, but go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, the next project is Sweetwater Supply Project. This project is advanced to the construction phase. We had a bid opening on December 20th of last year. We received 6 bids. The range of bids were from $400,000 to $656,000. Site work specialists, so they were the low bidder. Their bid was for $399,975, and the engineer's estimate was for $543,840.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to continue the discussion, this project involved the town of Newcastle, which supplies water to the Cambria Improvement and Service District. And Sweetwater was a district that came to the commission really 6-7 years ago. We did a level 2 study. They wanted to drill their own Madison well. And with pressure from the commission, I was leading the charge, and I still have a bad name among some people in the Sweetwater area, said, no, we're not going to fund a new Madison well. We have a water district that receives water from Newcastle, and you can tie into their system. And Sweetwater is still trying to do that. Sweetwater has an EPA administrative order against them. And even as you see on the agenda for Friday, we've now scratched the Cambria request for additional funds because their bids came in high. But Cambria is the missing piece now. They're upgrading their system, and then Sweetwater system will tap into it, avoiding a Madison well. The water is still coming out of the Madison because it's coming from Newcastle, but we don't have another $1 million well potentially. Senator Driscoll, I hear what you're saying. And
Love it. And you've got
yeah.
pipeline you can tap into for more users rather than doing more.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Brian, the Wheatland number 7 well.
Yes, the last project is Wheatland number 7 well. This project moved to the closeout status on the second page there. Final project cost is $521,578. WWDC's funding share was $349,457.33. And we reverted back into account one, $153,042.67.
Questions on the Wheatland well? All right. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
I think that takes us to the state forester. Is that correct, Harry?
So, Mr. Chairman, this is follow-up from the June meeting, and Jody's going to provide, Jody's had some conversation with the state forester. I don't think Bill's in the audience, so no. And this was a request with regards to the fire mitigation study that is going forward for the Sheridan area. And I think Senator Hicks had asked the question, is it more efficient to have state personnel do these? Because we're going to see more of them, and I would agree with that. So Jody has reached out to State Forester Bill Crapser and just wanted to report back to you that discussion.
Mr. Chairman, as Director Labonte said, I contacted Bill concerning what he thought it would take to do these type of wildfire hazard mitigation studies within the forestry division. And he estimated that it would take one full-time employee at what they call their forestry program analyst position. And they think that they would be able to get one plan done per year along with some other good neighbor work. And that has to deal with some legislation that I'm sure Senator Hicks can explain if anybody has a question on that. He thinks that they could make that money go a lot further than doing it through a consultant like what we've hired for the past 3 studies. I did run some numbers on just what a FTE in that position class would be if anybody's interested in that information, but that's what Bill sent us back for that. And I know that Senator Hicks probably had a more extensive conversation with Bill Crapser also, so.
Any other information that we want from Jody? All right. Thank you, Jody. Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so the conversation I did have with the state forester is what typically happens with these is once we appropriate the money, the consultant's hired. As the consultant, the first and second stop they make is to the Wyoming State Forestry Department, pull out all of their database, incorporate that with any information for the Forest Service, which the state forester already has access to. So in one way, some of the cost-efficient savings is they're using our own resources to develop these reports anyway. So there really becomes some cost savings associated with that. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a discussion that we continue to move forward. When we get to Friday, there'll be some discussion along that I think that you're going to see some direct connections when we get to this LAVA environmental impact statement that ties right back into water and forestry again. And so keep this in mind as we move forward. I think there's going to be some discussions that we need to facilitate, both the commission and the select water committee, as to how do we institutionalize the ability of the state of Wyoming to be very efficient on how we expend our money for either dealing with forestry issues that affect water yield or fire mitigation programs for municipal or other, could be fire districts, the way the current language I think is wrote. Doesn't necessarily have to be a municipality. It could be a rural fire district that could come in and ask for funding through the program under the special districts. But keep this in the back of your mind. I think it's a discussion that we need to have as we go forward.
Senator Anselmi Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jody, just the question for me. Remind me, I know we did look at a consultant and the cost. What did you find? What have we paid these consultants in the past? And what is your estimate of the full-time employee cost?
Mr. Chairman, so we've completed 2 studies and we're currently in a third. So the Cheyenne study was $163,000 was the final amount that was paid. The Buffalo study was $118,000. And right now we're in the throes of the Sheridan study and we're under contract with the consultant for $161,400. And that, will fluctuate as we get towards the end of the contract. For the full-time employee at that position description plus their benefits, it would be $7,224 a month, which comes out to $86,688 a year.
Anything else? All right, I'll try to let you off the hook for the second time. Right, thank you. And I think that leaves us with an overview of the tour tomorrow. Harry? And Katie will correct you if you say anything wrong, I'm sure.
Okay, so I direct you to tab M. And so as you can see on that tour, we're going to depart the Hampton 8 a.m. So please do not be late. We're going to look at, first stop is and where'd Brian go? Brian. Benner Connection Building. This is a building to connect Benner, which is one of these outlying districts, into the Gillette-Madison system. So to give you a sense of what these connection buildings are, typically have valving the meter. A quick stop there. We're then going to go to the Donkey Creek Pump Station, which is one of the big pumping facilities to move water from the Madison well field into Gillette. Then we will head towards the well area, which gets us to the Pine Ridge Disinfection Facility. And then hopefully, well, not hopefully, but we will then, the schedule shows we're going to visit Madison Well M13, which is one of the new wells. I had a conversation with adjacent landowners, Ivan Cranston, last night, and there are a number of the adjacent landowners that would like to join the tour at this point in time, and I said, you're more than welcome. Ivan actually suggested we visit well M15 simply because it is higher geographically, and you're able to then see a better view of the whole landscape in terms of where the existing well field is. And I think, I'm not positive, but hopefully to point out where some of these adjacent landowners as well. So we may deviate, move from M13 to M15. It's a longer gravel road trip, so we'll see. We're not talking about a long distance, but can the buses make it up to M15? Ivan thought they could, so there'll be a slight deviation there. The landowners that would be joining us will meet us at basically the boundary on the state section where the 5 new wells are located. And then we'll do a quick drive-by on the Cranston property just so you can get a feeling for the relationship on location of lands with the well field, and then lunch at Keyhole Reservoir before we head off to Sundance and then back to Pine Haven. So, Brian, was there other items you wanted to discuss? Yeah, you have some maps to.
So, Mr. Chairman, that we just had a handout. So, again, as Harry indicated, the first handout was the tour itinerary. The second sheet shows the stops. If in the legend there's a yellow cross, and it actually shows the number along the route. As Harry indicated, there's 8 stops. The third attachment is the Madison well field. This particular drawing shows the existing well field, which is in orange. And then to the left and upper left, there's the new Madison well field, which is wells M11 through M15. This also has the property ownership for discussion up at the well site. Morrison Merrily, who is the hydrogeologist for the project, will be on the site to talk about the drilling operations as well as any questions that might come up. The fourth handout is actually a schematic of M13. That's a well we'll be visiting, so that you have some references, those discussions are taking place. The next handout is to get from the, we actually use the Carlisle, but it shows the directions to get to Kehoe State Park, and that's where the lunch will be served. And attached to that is the actual directions from Carlisle to get to the Kehoe State Park, Tatonka campground area. And then there was a map for those who are driving that might not be taking the bus tomorrow. It shows it's a blow up of the Kehoe State Park, and it shows the campground where we're going to have lunch. So you can use this map to get to it. The last attachment was a map to get from Sundance to Commissioner Sucre's house for the for dinner for the barbecue.
So, Mr. Chairman, we do have 2 buses lined up, so I think that's the most efficient way to travel. And we have Gillette representatives that will be on the bus to explain the facilities, and then we're going to make those stops, and so we'll have an explanation there as well. So I think it's going to be a good tour, and hope everybody enjoys it. Thank you to Commissioner Sucre, who's going to sponsor the dinner tomorrow night. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for today.
Anything else?
If we're on the bus, we can't get lost, can we?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman.
Wait and see.
I'm not loud enough here or something. Mr. Chairman, so this is a little off the beaten track too, but since we have a new reservoir, I don't know whether that thing was ever considered as a water supply for Gillette. I believe it was. I've had some people say that it was cost prohibitive. If any of you were involved in that study, I guess I'd like an explanation of the costs and why we wouldn't consider that as a possibility instead of new wells, or if it is just way too cost prohibitive, and maybe do that. You're going to be doing some studies on what to do with the dam now that we have it, before we get other users dependent on that water. Commissioner Geis brought up the idea that maybe we would be draining the Madison aquifer. That could be a problem in the future, and it becomes a big problem to any of the users that are running out of the water that they've been dependent on. So I guess I'd like an explanation on how difficult it'd be to get the water from, because I think it's level or downhill to get here. I just don't know how many hills there are in between. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, and Representative Eklund, you're referring to Lake DeSmet.
Yes.
Okay.
Did I call it?
I didn't hear a name.
Oh,
So
okay.
DeSmet.
Okay.
And I'll certainly talk a little bit about, well, I guess I'll share, I intended to do this on Friday, but closing for the purchase of Lake Healy Reservoir and the water permits in DeSmet was completed on June 26th. State of Wyoming now owns those assets, and so Jason and myself have been kind of scrambling to make sure that water users that are provided water out of Healy Reservoir in particular and the DeSmet pipeline were not left in kind of a nebulous situation, that they had water this year. So we've been working on that through July. There's been one new water service agreement that's been proposed. I've got a request for another one, spoken to another irrigator that uses Healy water just the other day. So it's been a busy time in terms of our transition. But Representative Eklund is referring to when the reservoir, when the succession of Reynolds Mining to Texaco to Chevron to then, and I can't recall the exact names, but it had a Pacific Core interest in there at that time in terms of ownership. And then at least Lake DeSmet was given they tried to give it to the state of Wyoming. State of Wyoming refused. This is late 1990s. It was then given to a 3-county coalition. I believe they had a joint powers board in place. Sheridan County, Johnson County, and Campbell County. The thought being that DeSmet, with a volume of 230-some thousand acre feet, offered water supply for all 3 of those counties. Campbell County, so if you look at the costs, and I'm thinking road miles at this point, it's about 90 miles from Johnson County to Campbell County. Who travels that?
Pretty close.
Okay. So to move water from DeSmet to Gillette, they were looking at 90 miles of pipeline. And the issue then becomes, it's not a groundwater source, it's a surface water source. It would also require a surface water treatment plant be constructed. Gillette functions totally on groundwater now. They don't have a treatment plant. So that was what Gillette was faced with. And after several years of cost to operate the reservoir, Gillette really declared that the cost was prohibitive. 90 miles of pipe plus a new surface water treatment plant. They dropped out first, and then the 2-county coalition, then ultimately Sheridan County dropped out for similar reasons, that they just didn't feel it was worthwhile. Although Sheridan County retained some water rights in DeSmet, so they're hedging their bet if they need water. But that's about a 40-mile, maybe a little less than 40 miles to traverse from DeSmet into Sheridan. So they still have an interest in that reservoir, but it's not an ownership in the reservoirs per se. It's a water right interest. So what the state of Wyoming has now acquired is the ownership of 3 permits in Lake DeSmet. We do not have an ownership in DeSmet. We own 3 water right permits, totaling about 62,000 acre feet. So it was just, in Gillette's case, does it make sense to look at trying to build that kind of a pipeline? I will tell you, there was also discussion during coal bed methane days of taking coal bed methane water, which is generally very good quality water, and collecting it and piping it to Gillette. Similar issues happened, still a long ways to Gillette, still need a surface water treatment plant, and those ideas really kind of fell by the wayside as well. And that's kind of, and then I mentioned the Fort Union well field, new one south of Gillette, that was looked at, and ultimately Gillette concluded that it was in their best interest to expand the Madison well field system. That's what history I know on the project. Okay.
Commissioner Geist confirms that.
Okay, I'm in good shape then.
Any other comments or anything?
To add to that, Mr. Chair, what Harry said, back about 40 years ago, Lake DeSmet was looked at a water source for Gillette, and that's a long time ago. I don't know if you'll find that study, but there was one created, if I recall. In fact, it was talked about at the Gillette City Council. And at that time, I think there were some engineers involved, and I'm not sure there was a water development study, but there was a study done by engineers. And I remember being at the council meeting when they made that determination not to run that pipeline here. I think a lot of it was because of hydrology, pump stations, hills, and then, of course, the distance. But that was seriously looked at. And I thought then that that would be the way to go back when I was just a young guy. But they didn't do it.
Senator Driscoll?
Chairman, if anybody wants to find it, it's on both the Water Development website and City of Gillette website. There's a level 2 study done early on, and it's there. It's very concise, and they spent a lot of time and quite a bit of money on it. Truth is, the well field sits perfectly because of gravity feeds. They found the right solution.
Yeah, I thought so.
Else on that subject? Anything else for the good of the order? Apparently not, and we'll see you tomorrow at the Hampton Inn.
8 a.m.
Leave our stuff, Katie.
Can we leave everything, Katie?